Yo, what is up, guys? I am Josh, and this is hashtag Life Choices.
I am Anath. This is the podcast where we aim to help you make the best life choices.
I am David, here to welcome you to Table Talk Thursdays.
Lastly, I am Lemuel, and this is our weekly segment where we talk anything and everything under the sun. Thought-provoking questions, life-changing stories, or even the most random of things.
And still, for the third week in a row, we're not talking about random things. We are sticking with our series on life skills because on our first episode of Table Talk Thursdays, we asked each other, what do we consider to be the most important life skills? And we have discussed the first two, which Lemuel and David brought up in the past 2 weeks, which were social skills and financial management. And today we'll be talking about what I believe is the most important life skill that everybody should have, which is how to respond to failure. I usually say how to fail, but that gives the wrong connotation that I want people a blueprint. It's like, oh, take these steps and you'll fail. No. I think it's something that we all need to be able to deal with and gain as a skill, because a lot of us don't know how to face failure. School teaches us how to succeed. They give us the blueprint for success. But it is the reality of life that we all will encounter failure, and how we deal with that will spell the difference between success in life or eventually failure in life. But it doesn't mean that you fail once, that your life is a failure. It's always going to be the response. And I guess I wanted to throw to you guys, before we go in depth on practical tips on how to respond to failure, that maybe share how you would personally respond to failure. What is your post-failure protocol? How do you go about these experiences in life that don't go your way?
Okay, I'm going to start. So when I fail, and that does happen quite a few times,
Same.
the first step for me is acceptance, is realize, okay, I've made a mistake or I have failed. And once I've accepted that, then I move on, because dwelling on failure, that's not needed. It really just brings you down, and it's not necessary, because why do you want to dwell on something that was not successful? And so when I do fail, I accept that I have failed, and now I start working towards fixing it for the next time. And so one thing I always say is, when you do fail, do not dwell on the past, do not dwell on your mistakes, but now understand, how do I fix this for the next term, for the future? So acceptance and then analysis.
Yeah,
I wish I could say the same, but for the acceptance part, there's this stage for me called despair. And
that's not just for you, man.
And thanks for pointing that out. And I tend to go through a lengthy process of grieving for my failure before I tend to accept it and start to analyze what went wrong and try to correct it eventually. So I really do need to listen to this podcast.
It's very natural. I think we can't remove the emotional part of failure because we're human beings. We are naturally geared to be happy when things go right, and naturally geared to be disappointed and in despair when faced with failure. And what Anath said really resonated with me. This is an example that I brought up a couple podcasts ago, but it's the Google Postmortem Protocol. So it's an official process that Google undergoes when their employees face failure. And they outline 3 things that are very connected with what Anath said. First is identify the most important problems. This is when, after you've accepted that it happened, you try to assess what you can learn from it. So first is identify the most important problems. What went wrong? Where is it that you could do better next time? Just identify those things.
It's usually not just one.
No, it's oftentimes a whole host of other things. And sometimes you may not even be in control of the things that caused the failure, which is why you need to identify it. Because sometimes failures happen and we blame ourselves, we get ourselves down. But then what if after this process of identifying, you find out it was an outside or external factor?
You're stressing yourself out for no reason.
But if you find out that it's an internal factor, then you can move on to step 2. Create a record. You need to be able to write these things down. Maybe write it down, type it down, create a record so that you can look back at this failure in the future so that you can correct what you did wrong in the past, because your failures will repeat. There will be times that your failures will be very similar, and if you don't have a record to go back at, then you won't be able to, like Anath said, assess and move forward. Because if you don't know what to do the next time it comes around, it's dead. Like, it's just gonna happen again. History repeats itself. And lastly is promote growth and not blame. Try not to point fingers. Even if it's not an external factor, try to address the things that you can address. You don't try to point, oh, because Anath didn't do this, and you try to blame Anath for all your failures. I'm sorry. Okay.
Don't blame Anath.
Don't blame Anath. Yes. So promote growth and not blame. So instead of pointing out what other people did wrong, instead look at what you did wrong and see where you can grow from that failure moving forward. So I just wanted to share that because it's connected to what Anath said, but we didn't get to hear what David would usually do when faced with failure.
When responding to failure, one of the best ways you could do is to share it. Share the burden, share the experience with
Oh,
others.
share the failure. You should fail
Don't
too.
share the failure,
share the
but
failure.
you do share this podcast. So if there are friends you think they want to hear this, please go
link
share
them to the
them.
podcast.
I think
We would
that's a
appreciate
great way
that.
to deal with my despair. If I had someone to share the burden to or to express myself, I
Yeah.
think that's someone can also help me process it later on.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
sometimes we just need someone to listen, and sometimes we need somebody to ask questions that would help us process through this burdening thing called failure. Something that is so hard, that is so difficult, that we all face.
Well, I've had a lot of experiences, and these failures actually can make you either to a more prideful person or a more humble person. You could either get angry and say, why are these things happening to me? I should deserve more. Or you're telling yourself, oh man, there's a lot for me to learn. And I would want to encourage everyone to lean towards the humbling side so that this experience can make you into a better person. Because there's this quote that says, you either win or you learn, right? I bet my guys can expound on this even further.
Yeah, you either win in your failure or you either learn. Because if you win, then that means things went well. But when things don't go well, you can learn instead. Because in every experience that we have, there's always something good that you can extract from it.
Yeah, I want to share a learning in one of my recent failures. A couple of weeks ago, I received my advisory grades for
Oh.
my second semester in college.
If you guys don't know, advisory grades are kind of like midterm grades. Like they give your grade, I guess, estimated grade with your current standing in the midterm.
And if those advisory grades were my final grades, I don't think I'd be in college anymore.
Oh, no.
They were very bad. And so when looking at that, I was quite disappointed. I guess I did have a moment of grieving, but I realized that yes, my grades were low, but how do I move on from here? I sat down one day and I was disappointed because I had to explain to my parents why my grades were so low, and I had to also talk to my peers about it, right? And so one day in the morning, actually, I was seated down on the sofa and I was just praying, and I said, God, I am so discouraged by my grades and I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can continue in on the current path I'm on because I want to do so much more with my life and I don't know if I can balance it all. And God's response to me was, have you forgotten about what I can do for you? And all this time, what I was doing was depending on my own ability to get through college, to get good grades, and I wasn't committing it to God. And God was saying, what about me? Have you not considered trusting me to help you through it? And this was a big eye-opener for me because I realized that I need to be doing this side by side with God and not trying to go ahead of the race and try to do it myself, because in the end I will fail. And I was talking to my mentor in Sri Lanka about this, and she said, sometimes you fail so that your dependence on God grows greater. And that also opened my eyes, because the reality was I was not dependent on God during these situations. And so for me to truly start walking with God, He had to allow me to fail so that I would now turn to God and say, God, help me through this. And to my listeners here who probably wondering what I am saying at this very moment, trusting God changed my life. Trusting God every day continues to change my life. And that's something I want to share with all of you, because God changes lives. Having a relationship with God continues to be the greatest blessing in my life.
that just goes to show the thing David said, which is you either win or you learn. And that is a practical example of learning. Through his failure, he learned that he needed to trust God. And that is the best perspective. You look at what you can learn. So David, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just want to point out this beautiful experience that I've had in college. You know, I was almost kicked out of the course. I almost did not become an accountant, a CPA that I am today, because we had this maintaining grade. If I'm going to put it into percentage, we needed around 70%. And my first exam was around 55%.
Oh no.
So that was quite far. And considering that this is an average out of 5 exams, the next one became 59%. The next one, and I studied really hard for this, it became 61%. So after 3 exams, that's 3 out of 5, I would lose hope. I would say, oh man, I'm not gonna make it, but I did my best in preparing. I looked for a tutor. And you know, my mom, the night before the 4th exam, asked me this very deep and profound and life-changing question. It says, in relation to what Ines is talking about, my mom asked me, are you willing to trust God even if you fail? So this was me at that point. I was about to lose the course. I was about to get kicked out. I'm gonna lose my dream. And then I told my mom after thinking about it, yes, I will just trust God. And after that, I got a 91%.
Wow. And that was enough.
Huge.
That was enough to pull everything up.
Jump. It was not enough. But there was the finals, which covered everything. And there, I got an even higher score. It was a 92%.
Wow.
And my final grade was 70%. Around that.
Just right.
Just right.
Yeah.
Just right.
And this whole experience reminds me of something that I posted on Instagram before, because for a time I posted my photography along with some inspirational quotes every now and then. So it was kind of an exercise in trying to look at the world and seeing what I can learn from it. And I had one post that referred to failure. And basically what I said was ruins only exist when people don't rebuild. Failures don't make someone a failure. Not trying again does. We must all learn from failure and keep on striving.
Yes, in the story that I shared with you, you know that it's not me who made that huge jump. It was a miracle. And
it was all a matter of not giving up, because you're not considered a failure until you stop. Yes. Because if you don't bounce back, that's the only time you're considered a failure. Like buildings, basically, if something crashes down and it's not rebuilt again, then you can say that those are the ruins of that building. But if it's built again, you won't see the ruins. You will see the new building that was put up in that place. And that's one practical tip. You don't look at your failure as the be-all end-all of your life. You don't look at it as your identity. You don't call yourself a failure. You call yourself someone who has failed. And in the spirit of life choices, choose your own headline. Choose what kind of identity you want to give to yourself. Choose what kind of headline you want to give this experience of failing, and choose to say, I am not a failure. I am just someone who has failed. Because if you encounter the same situation in the future and you call yourself a failure, then you're not going to try again, because you're going to say, it's my identity, it's who I am, I'm someone who fails. But instead, if you say, I'm someone who just encountered failure, then you can tell yourself, oh, that was failure before, but now it's different. I can do something better this time.
I like what Josh said about bouncing back. I think that responding to failure is very important. And when we have a bounce back mentality, that is what is going to keep us away from being a failure in all these moments of weakness and challenges. Set your mind on bouncing back on everything. When you fail, when you do not experience the true success you were striving for, remember that there is always room, there's always time to bounce back. Don't give up, because the moment you give up, the moment you give in to the challenge, that's when you're considered a failure.
Yeah, and I want to quote a verse from the Bible which says, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. And I want to be very careful when I say forgetting. You don't forget the fact that you failed. You forget the emotions that are connected to failure. You forget your self-pity. You forget all those things. You remember that you have failed. You remember what you had learned and apply it in the future, straining toward what is ahead, constantly pushing towards making yourself a better person and responding better in future failures. And I want to add one more thing, because I've given a talk on failure a bunch of times because it's something that is very personal to me. I'm someone who has experienced a lot of failures, just like a lot of us. And one of the crucial things that I really learned is it's the response that matters. I have this illustration of potatoes, eggs, and coffee. I don't know if you guys have heard that before, but basically it's an illustration of the different ways we can respond to failure. The illustration here is there are 3 pots of water, 3 pots of boiling water. First pot of water, I drop potatoes. Second, I drop eggs, and last, I drop coffee. What happens to potatoes when you boil it?
You get boiled.
It gets obviously, dude, it gets boiled.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, but what happens? What happens to the consistency of the potato?
It's soft.
It gets really
Yes.
soft. It gets very mushy. Good for mashed potato. Second is eggs. What happens when you boil eggs?
You get hard.
It becomes hard-boiled egg. The shell.
Eventually, yes.
Yeah. So even if you break the shell, it's still hard on the inside. And lastly, if you put coffee in boiling water, you get a drink.
Yes.
You get a delicious drink. So that is an illustration of the different ways we could face life. Not only life, but challenges. So the boiling water represents the challenges we have in life. So potatoes, we could become soft. We get down on ourselves. We give ourselves a hard time. We allow the world to beat us up. That is first. Do you want to be potato? I hope the answer is no. Second is the egg. You harden yourself. You have a hard heart. You tend to point at everyone else. You point at your parents. You blame your parents for your failure. You blame your classmates. You blame your siblings. You blame your friends for everything because you have gotten hard in failure. But you shouldn't be potatoes, nor should you be an egg. You should be coffee.
Because the coffee brings out the flavor from
Yes.
from whatever the powder you put on the boiling water.
Yeah, and the difference is when the potato and the egg went into the water stayed the same. But when you put coffee in boiling water, the water changed as well. Because that is how we should face our problems in life. We shouldn't just let the problems change us. Instead, we change the problems ourselves. Act on your problems. Don't let it be that, oh, it just happened, that's it. You don't let your problems change you. Instead, you change your problems. And that is something that I always want to encourage people with, because we get paralyzed with the difficulties in life, but actually there is always something we can do about it if we try to do something about it. So at this point in time, we're just going to recap all the points said. I think since this is the life skill that I said is the most important to me, I had a lot to say in this, because it's very personal to me. I hate it when people encounter failure and give up on themselves.
No,
because
don't give up.
on yourself. There is still so much hope. So I'm just going to run through all the tips that we went through today, and hopefully you could apply these things in your life. So first is acceptance to grief to analysis. So allow yourself to grieve in the situation. Allow yourself to be in despair, like Lemo said. He goes through a process of despair. It's part of life, but don't stop there. Analyze and learn. Just like what I talked about in the post-mortem protocol of Google, that is a very helpful tip on how you should face failure. Create a record and then promote growth. Next is share your failure with other people. This is an amazing tip. Practical also, because there might be people that have experienced that failure before, and you can learn from them, and you could use that to bounce back from whatever thing you are suffering or am facing at the moment. Next is you either win or you learn. You either have a good situation and it happens everything according to plan, or you fail and then you learn. Next is you learn from failure and keep on striving. You don't just end with the learning, you press towards what is ahead, knowing what you had done in the past, but correcting it in the future so that that same failure does not happen again. Next is the response to failure matters. We cannot control the challenges that happen in life, but our response is something that we definitely have power over. So do not react, instead respond to your failures. And lastly, act on your problems. Don't let your problems change you. You don't want to be potatoes. You don't want to be eggs. You want to be coffee. You want to change the boiling water instead of letting the boiling water change you. So once again, I want to thank our sponsors, which are not existent.
Any coffee companies?
Any coffee
wanting to-
company? Yeah. We love coffee because that is the right way to respond to failure. But if you guys want to support our podcast, we have a Patreon page. So that's patreon.com/lifechoicesph, as well as businesses that maybe want to sponsor us and we could plug their products here in this part of the program or even at the beginning. Just send us an email at lifechoicesph@gmail.com. And at this point in time, it's time to say goodbye. We just want to thank you guys for listening to the Life Choices podcast. Hope to have you guys back here on Saturday for Situational Saturdays. But before you go, we just want to remind you, in this life, we have no choice but to make choices. So choose wisely. See you in the next podcast.